มันไม่ใช่การตัดสู้ไงลูกมันเป็นชีวิตแห่งกรรมแห่งวิบาก
Life is not enlightening. It's a life of karma and karmic difficulties. It begins at the mind. The karma it begins there. Mental karma is the starting point of karma and karmic difficulties of the mind. Therefore, everyone must not be dwelling within the mind. Step back to use the essence of cutting diluted knowing to purify constantly. This will also cut off the cycle of karma of oneself. There is no need to go anywhere else. Step back to conclude within the essence of cutting diluted knowing. Disengage from disengagement itself. The word mai is the code, essential code of cutting. And don't use it for the act of cutting anything. Must step back to disengage from disengagement only. This is cutting within the cutting itself. Switch out at the circuit breaker. Cut the cutting itself. It's not about an act of cutting anything. The act of cutting, there is someone who is cutting. Cutting within itself. Use the essential code thoroughly. Step back to disengage from disengagement itself. Constantly. This will cut off the cycle of karmic difficulties of the mind. This is the conclusion of the essence of the enlightenment. There is not much. If there is much, that means there is no cutting. Cutting, there is not much, because cutting cut through itself. This will decrease the cycle of karmic difficulties within the mind. Thoughts, recalls, emotions, and feelings go beyond the fortune of life, beyond beingness of consciousness. Don't search for good fortune. That is a mistake. Within this world, within this samsara, there is no real goodness. It is temporary, whether it's good or bad. There is no need to search for it. Use the essence of cutting diluted knowing to make a conclusion constantly with it. Step back to mai, within mai itself. This will be beyond life, beyond the mind, naturally. It will be beyond goodness and badness, naturally. All that good fortune, bad fortune, even is good fortune, is not really good, because it is anicca. The fortune is anicca and anatta. It is temporary thing. You are chasing to do good, to create good fortune. But that's not ending, child. Because the fortune is anicca within itself. There is nothing that is eternal. Good or bad can end its time to pay back. Therefore, don't waste the time in the matter of fortune or the predestination. Return to use the essence of cutting diluted knowing, cut through the cutting itself, mai within mai itself constantly. Step back, uninvolved with any uninvolvement itself constantly. Use the reminders of cutting itself. Why step back to disengage from disengagement itself?
ก็เพราะว่าชีวิตมันมี
Because
แต่ตัณหา
life
offside
is full of the desire that is offsided, always aiming forward, determines forward.
เป็นกระแส
Is
ตัณหาหมด
the stream of desire totally.
มัน offside ตลอด
Is always offsided,
จ้องต้องตั้ง
always projecting forward, aiming forward.
ตรงนี้มันก็เหมือนว่ามันเป็นวิธีการ
Expectations.
สร้างกรรมตลอดเวลา
This is the way of always creating karma.
โมหะกรรมตัณหากรรมอุปทาน
Karma of desire, delusion, and delusive attachment.
กรรมตลอด
Always creating
เพราะ
karma.
นั้นจึงให้ถอยกลับ
That's why we have to back off.
ให้รู้สติขึ้น
Use the reminders, cut through the cutting itself.
ไม่ตัวไม่เอง
Mind from mind itself. Step back, back off, constantly back off. Mind from mind itself, constantly. This is beyond finding a refuge.
มันเหมือนกับว่าทุกคนตรง
It's like
เนื้อหา
everyone
ตัดตัวเองตัดรู้
is aligned with the essence of the enlightenment itself. Cutting deluded knowing
ก็เลยไม่ต้องหา
itself. That's why there is no need to look for a refuge.
แต่ถ้าเธอทั้งหลายไม่ย้อน
If all of you not back off to disengage from disengagement itself, cut through the cutting itself, you will always look for a refuge. It's endless,
จบสิ้น
endless.
บางทีที่เราหาที่พึ่ง
Sometimes
ที่พึ่งด้วย
the refuge is not a refuge that you look for.
มันเหมือนก็ให้เรา
It's
หลอกให้
like
เราไปยึดติด
it's
ใน
deceiving
ใหม่ๆ
you
อะไรใหม่ๆ
to be fixated to a new way constantly, endlessly.
แล้วก็ชั่วคราวอีก
And it's temporary again.
แต่นั้นสิ่งสำคัญคือไม่ต้องไป
Therefore,
หา
the important point is there is no need to search for a
ย้อนกลับ
refuge.
มาตัดตัวตัดเอง
Step
ย้อนกลับ
back
มาไม่ตัวไม่
to cut through the cutting itself, mind from mind itself, constantly, constantly, constantly.
ไม่ยึดตัวไม่ยึดเอง
Not attached to the non-attachment itself, constantly.
สติขึ้น
Recall it.
ถอยกลับมา
Remind it.
ไม่ยึดตัวไม่ยึดเองเรื่อยๆ
Step back to not attach to the non-attachment itself
เกี่ยวตัวไม่
constantly.
เกี่ยวเองเรื่อย
Uninvolve it in the uninvolvement itself constantly.
ๆใช้รหัสใน
Use
เนี่ยเรียกว่าเป็นรหัส
the
ใน
essential
ในการ
code
ตรัสรู้เนี่ย
of the cutting deluded knowing to remind oneself constantly.
เดี๋ยวมันจะตัดให้เอง
There will be cutting naturally.
ถึงจะคิดอารมณ์
Thought, recalls, emotions, feelings, restlessness will be cut off automatically.
ความการเสาะแสวงแกว่ง
All
หา
the
ตัด
searches
ลอย
in the way that is vague will be cut off naturally.
เดี๋ยวจะได้นอกเหนืออารมณ์สังสารวัฏเป็น
This will enable oneself to go beyond emotions of samsara,
นอกเหนือดวงชะตา
beyond
นอกเหนือ
fortunes, enable to go beyond the mind.
บ่อยๆหน่อยลูกบ่อยๆหน่อย
Use it
ย้อนกลับมา
constantly.
ไม่เกี่ยวตัว
Back
ไม่เกี่ยว
off.
เอง
Uninvolve it in the uninvolvement itself.
ไม่ยึดตัวไม่ยึดเอง
Back off.
บ่อย
To not attach to the non-attachment itself more often. Mind from mind itself often, often,
ๆ
often.
หาตัดสรุปเรื่อย
Let's conclude more often with the essence of cutting within itself.
ๆมันไม่ได้มีเยอะ
There is not much.
ไม่ต้องไปเจริญสติ
There is no need to practice mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom in the way that they have been circling, arising and ceasing like that.
ยุติ
Back off.
ไม่ใช่ไปเจริญ
Cease the ceasing itself is not about practicing.
ไปปฏิบัติมันก็เหมือนกับ
The
ทางโลก
practice
ทางธรรมก็ตัวปฏิบัติตัวเดียวกันแต่เปลี่ยน
It's
ลั
the
กษณะ
same
ปฏิบัติ
thing. The worldlings and the noble ones use it. It's still samsara as usual, just change location.
ตัดเนี่ยมันไม่ใช่การไปป
The
ฏิบัติ
essence of cutting is not to practice.
ในการยุติในตัวยุติ
Ceasing within ceasing itself, cutting within the cutting itself is not a practice.
ต้องฟังรหัสใน
Listen to the essential code
อย่า
thoroughly,
ลูกก็ต้อง
with everything mind from mind itself constantly.
มันตัดให้
That is cutting.
พอนึกขึ้นมามันก็ตัดเองเลย
Once you recall, the cutting is right there.
ตรงเนี้ยมันยิ่งกว่าดวง
Right here is beyond good fortune,
ยิ่งกว่าดวงไม่ดี
beyond bad fortune,
ยิ่งกว่าบุญกุศลยิ่ง
Beyond
กว่า
merits
สวรรค์
beyond goodness, beyond heavens or hells,
มันยิ่งกว่าความเป็นพ่อเป็น
beyond
ตั้งแต่
realms of existence,
ถึงเวทีมัน
from Brahma realm to hell realms.
มันไม่เป็นพ่อเป็นครูมันตัด
is not become realms of existence. The cutting within itself is not that. When there is no cutting, it creates realms of existence. To make the mind in this way and that way will become human realms, Brahma realms. Practice the mind is not cutting, is not the essence of cutting diluted knowing, is not enlightenment. The Arahants is not classified as realms of existence. It's not. Whether it's Brahma realm or angel realms is not realms of existence. That's the Arahants. Neither the Buddhas are not in the classification of realms because they are derived from not attached to the non-attachment itself, from cutting within the cutting itself, from not attached to the non-attachment itself. That's why it doesn't create realms of existence. Therefore, back off. Use the essence of cutting diluted knowing, cut through the cutting itself constantly. Listen to the language at the present, not in the book. The word mind is all of the non-attachment. The word mind is all of the non-attachment. It's all of cutting within the cutting itself. Normally, you heard that's about cutting this and that. That is further than the true cutting. What's an act of cutting about? Why not cutting within itself? So that there's ending. What is there to be letting go of? Why not let go of the letting go itself instead? So that there's ending. Cut off right away. There is no need to chase to switch off here and there for millions of switches. That is so confusing. Therefore, listen to the sentence that shorten the short, that end within no time. Mind from mind itself. Let go of the letting go itself is not an act of letting go. In this way, there is shorten the short, ending within no time, not indirect. This is the ceasing itself. If you're following the mind that is good or bad, is endless. It will be just circling within the mental karma, within samsara. From now on, don't be vague. There is no need to be deludedly searching externally to look for a temple, to do merit. There is no need to ask for anything anymore. Step back. Mind from mind itself right here. Back off. Let go of the letting go itself right here. Mind from mind itself. Back off. Let go of the letting go itself, not attached to the non-attachment itself. Don't search for this thing anywhere else. It's right here within oneself. You can go anywhere to any temples. If you already give something, that's it, it's bygone. Don't ask for anything. Don't pray for anything. If you ask and pray for anything, it will create karmic difficulties immediately. Give and that's it. Sacrifice and that's it. That's the best already. Without attachment to goodness, without grasping for goodness, it's liberated in itself. It's already good in itself. That is the goodness without fixated to it. When you do merit, giving, sacrifice for the world and societies, and that's it, whether they are friends or not. Help and that's it. Liberation is within itself, that's bygone. Remember this point.
เรื่องการ
Mark
ให้
this
การเสีย
point.
สละการ
All about sacrifices and support in the world and societies.
ทำไปตามสถานการณ์
Do it according to circumstances,
การที่เขาทุกข์ยากลำบาก
according to their
ท
sufferings.
ำไป
Go at
แต่อย่าไปหวัง
help,
สิ่งใดอย่า
but don't expect anything from such an act.
ให้ช่วยแล้วไป
Help and that's it.
แล้วไป
Sacrifice and that's it.
มันหลุดพ้นในตรงเอง
The liberation is within itself.
อย่าเสียสละแบบไม่หลุดพ้น
Don't sacrifice in a way that is not liberating.
อย่าให้แบบไม่หลุดพ้น
Don't give in the way that is not liberating, child.
ลูกจะไปกราบไปไหว้ที่ไหนก็
Wherever you bow down, it's bygone. Liberation is right there simultaneously.
อย่าไหว้อย่ากราบแล้วไม่
Don't bow down in the way that is not liberating.
ขอนั่นขอนี่
Asking for this and that, how can there be liberation? It turns into death of karma instead.
มันจะเกิดการผูกมัดกันระหว่าง
There will be abiding tie up between the giver and the receiver,
ผู้ขอกับผู้
between the one who's asking and the one who's giving.
เกิดเงื่อนไขผูก
That is a condition that is binding, creating debt of gratitude between each other.
แล้วทีนี้มันก็ต้องไปเวียนว่ายตายเกิด
And then one have to pay back in each lifetime,
ไม่ว่ามนุษย์หรือเทวดาทั้งหลาย
whether it's
อย่า
humans
ไปสร้างเงื่อนไขต่อ
or
กันและกัน
deva, angels. Don't create conditions among one another.
เทพต่างๆตามวัดต่าง
The angels who are in temples,
ๆอย่าพากันสร้าง
in the deities, don't create conditions among one another.
ที่บุญคุณ
Debt of karma, debt of gratitude that is bound with each other. Conclude well with the essence. Giving and that's it.
น้อมแล้วไปกราบแล้วไป
Bowing down and that's it. It's bygone. Conclude well at this point.
มันจบ
With everything that is ending,
เนื้อหาตรัสรู้ต้องย้อน
the essence of the enlightenment must back off.
ตัดตัวตัดเอง
Cut through the cutting itself, mind from mind itself. That's it.
ตัวละเอง
Let go of the letting go itself. That's all.
ไม่ใช่ที่ถ้ำไหนไม่ใช่ที่วัดไหน
It's not at any temples or at any cave.
ป่าไหน
It's not
ไหน
at any
ต้องย้อน
tree
มาไหม้ตัวไหม้เองที่
or any
ตัว
forest.
เอง
Back off right here at oneself. Mind from mind itself right here.
จะเอาตัวเองไปตัดหรือจะมาตัดเอง
Using oneself to cut or cutting right at oneself.
ดังนั้นที่ตัดเนี่ยตัดตัวตัดเอง
Cutting is within the cutting itself.
ที่มาสรุปให้วันเนี้ยพวกเราจะได้
The conclusion today,
สติสมาธิ
there will be no vagueness within mindfulness, concentration, contemplation, insight, all the practice. It creates realms of existence right at the Brahma realm.
เกิดขึ้นจากการตั้งเอาทำเอา
This is the practice for attainment is impossible for the arahants because not the essence of the cutting
ตัดมันต้องแต่แรก
deluded knowing. Cutting is right at the cutting itself, mind from mind itself.
ละตัวละเอง
Let go of the letting go itself, which is cutting the cutting itself.
ปฏิบัติเอา
It's not a practice for attainment
ถ้าตั้งเอา
with projection because there is no cutting.
ได้พบภูมิแทน
There is no enlightenment because it will destine at the realm of existence. Brahma realm
พอมาโลกอนิจจังเทวโลก
is anicca.
มันหมดอายุร
Deva realm is anicca. It can end its payback time.
หมดอายุรกรรมไปจริงๆองค์พุทธาน่ะโปรดพรหมโลก
Actually,
จบมาหลายรุ่นแล้ว
Buddha has blessed all the Brahma realm and Deva realms or angel realms for many Buddha eras, and they end themselves for many generations. The present time, they are the new generations.
ช่วยต่อไป
The Buddhas will bless them to end
หาตรัสรู้ใหม่
also.
ไม่ใช่ทำเอาไม่ใช่ปฏิบัติ
It's not about practice.
ไหว้เอา
Praying for the merits are not to be grasped because they will be destined realm of existence instead. Mindfulness, concentration, contemplation, spiritual insight, meditative power. To practice for that, they will gain only realm of existence.
นั้นให้ฟังดีๆ
Listen well, and within no time. Use the reminders more often.
ถอยกลับมาไหม้ตัวไหม้เอง
Back
เร็วๆห
off
น่อยทุกอย่างเลย
mind from mind itself with everything simultaneously.
เล่นตัดรอบให้
It will cut off all the cycle, not to be circling, all the
การ
searches,
ปรารถนานี่ปรารถนา
finding refuge, wishing for this and that.
หมดสมุทัยทั้งหมด
This is all about samutai, causes of
เป็
suffering.
นรูปแบบแห่งทุกข์
It's the form of suffering totally, and the form of
จริง
samutai
ๆแล้ว
totally.
เราใช้ชีวิตเนี่ยมันก็แล้วไปทุกวันอยู่แล้ว
Life has been used up.
มันไม่ได้อะไร
It's bygone. There is nothing that one can gain from life.
ผ่านไปผ่าน
It's bypassing, discarding itself.
มันไม่ได้อะไรจากชีวิตจริงๆมันไม่มี
Nothing one can gain from life at all.
จนถึงวันตายก็ตาย
Until death is the same thing, dying for nothing as usual.
ผ่านทิ้งตลอดเวลามัน
It's bypassing at all times. No one can gain anything from life,
แต่นั้นไม่ต้องไป
truly.
ปรารถนาอะไร
Therefore,
เดือดร้อนตัวเอง
don't deludedly wish for anything until one has to suffer from it.
ตัดตัว
Use the essence of cutting within the cutting itself to conclude, to remind oneself constantly.
ไม่เองบ่อย
Step back to disengage from disengagement itself more often, uninvolved within the uninvolvement itself more often, not attached to the non-attachment
ๆ
itself.
อะไรนะ
It's not about not attached to anything,
ตัวไม่ยึดเอง
not attached to the non-attachment itself.
ตัวละตัวละเอง
Let go of the letting go itself.
มา
Back off.
แบบนี้นะ
This is the conclusion. Huh?
ไม่ใช่ไปคอยละอะไร
Don't act on not letting go of
ยุ่
anything
งวุ่นวาย
because it will be troubling.
มันเหลือเวลาอีกไม่นานแล้วลูกไต้หวันนี่จะเหลืออีกสักกี่ชีวิตก็ไม่รู้อ่ะ
Not much time left, child.
ดีๆนะสงครามมันใกล้
Beware.
ทันทีแล้วนะดีๆแล้วลูก
The war is coming so near already.
กี่ชีวิตอะถ้ารอบแห่งการตัดทะลุไม่พอ
If there is not enough cycle of cutting within the cutting itself, there will be
นอกเหนือธาตุสี่ดินน้ำลมไฟไม่ได้ธาตุสี่ดินน้ำลมไฟผันแปรเปลี่ยนแปลง
difficulties because one cannot go beyond earth, air, water, and fire. Suffering will be there.
จิตวิญญาณที่มันยึดติดกับการเป็นการอยู่
The consciousness that is fixated to itself, it will hang on to the elements of earth, air, water, and fire. When the world is shifting and changing, all these elements will shift accordingly. Disaster will be there, and it will be disastrous accordingly.
แผ่นดินมันถล่มโจมลงไปข้างล่างวิญญาณก็
The
จะ
earth
ข้างล่างไปด้วย
that
เลย
is
พื้นดินน่ะใต้ดินน่ะ
fall down,
เพราะว่ามันงมมือการใช้ชีวิต
disastrous.
หมกมุ่นมากเกินไปมันออกตัว
All the consciousness will fall down under the earth because it's not cutting. It's just preoccupied deeply. It will become
ตายแม่น้ำอยู่แม่น้ำตาย
demons.
ถ้ำอยู่ถ้ำตายป่าอยู่
Wherever they die, there will be
ถนน
death. Right there,
เรียกว่าภูมิอสุรกาย
it's called realms of the
ใน
demons,
อบายภูมิสี่
Asurakai.
แต่นั้นอย่าง
All
เดียว
those woeful realms will be
เนื้อ
stuck.
หาตัดสรุปเรื่อยๆ
Therefore, use the essence of cutting within the cutting itself more often. Mind from mind itself.
ไม่เอาตัวไม่เอาเอง
No grasping for the non-grasping itself.
ตัวไม่ยึดเอง
Not attached to the non-attachment
ถ้า
itself.
ปล่อยก็ปล่อยตัวปล่อยเอง
Let go of the letting go itself.
ปล่อยอะไรถ้าวางก็วางตัววางเอง
Put down the putting down itself. Back off.
นึกสติล้างนึกสติล้าง
The reminders that purify themselves more constantly,
บ่อย
more often, more often, more
ๆ
often.
ตามนั้นไปเอง
It will happen accordingly by itself.
อะไรเมื่อชอบตามคิดอยู่แล้ว
Normally, one will follow thoughts as the nature already.
ถ้าคิดในสิ่งที่มันตัดมันก็ตัด
If you think of cutting, then cutting will happen accordingly.
มันเป็นอย่างนั้นอยู่แล้ว
It's like that,
นึกสติ
naturally.
แบบไหนมันก็มักจะเป็น
Any reminders will happen according to the reminders.
นึกสติแบบไม่ตัด
If the reminder has no cutting, it will follow in such a way.
เป็นเพราะเป็นภูมิเป็น
It will create realm of existence and samsara accordingly.
แล้วสิ่งที่สำคัญคือให้ใช้การ
The important point is that use the forgiveness statement
ล้างกรรมล้าง
for samsara to purify karma and karmic difficulties.
กรรมกับโลกธาตุสองสวัสดิ์เนี่ย
Karma and karmic difficulties
ใช้ประทานด้วย
using
มันเกิ
delusion, desire, delusive attachment, it creates karma. Using greed, using hurting and harming, using taking advantage with the world, it creates karma. Therefore, use forgiveness statement to help, using a hosikam to help. Asking your leader to help lead for it. It's not about good fortune or bad fortune. Enable to go beyond fortune. Enable to cut within cutting itself. Beyond, enable for beyond goodness or badness. When it's not about grasping, then it can be beyond all that. Everything will be bygone from the bygone itself. With everything, with every matter, it's not about projection for practicing, for attainment. Bowing down and that's it. Sacrifice and that's it. Seeing and knowing and it's bygone. Mind from mind itself constantly. Uninvolved within the uninvolvement itself constantly, reminding of cutting within itself more often. If it's like this and you can do it, then there's no need to look for any teachers. Go ahead by yourself with the essence within oneself. Mind within itself by oneself. Cut through the cutting itself by oneself, so that ending is right there. Otherwise, you will be suffering. Without the essence of cutting deluded knowing, you will be suffering, always swinging with emotions, within thoughts. Emotions swinging day by day is suffering. Vedana is there. It's unbearable for everyone. But you cannot read it because it's unbearable. You can't read it. You cannot see through it in circumstances. Actually, everyone is in the unbearable state in this world. There is just a repeated. Sitting comfortably, lying down comfortably, taking on such comfort is repeated. It becomes a boredom. Even comfort is unbearable. It's a difficult thing. Otherwise, people don't look for something to do because it's repeated. Looking for something new to do. Always touching that kind of thing. Every moment is unbearable. If you're looking for something new to do, it's endless. It's always anicca as usual. Just like people searching for a new place for sightseeing, it's always boredom. Shifting like this is endless. Mind right away, with everything, mind from mind itself right away. Disengage from disengagement itself altogether, simultaneously. The essence of cutting within the cutting itself as a conclusion. Later on, there is no delusion with anything, whether it's old or new, relating without delusion. It's not that you have to find a new thing to replace the old. It's not to replace old thing from new thing, for a new thing. With every matter, enable to cut within the cutting itself. Use the essential code, mind. back off mind from mind itself constantly,
เตือนตักเตือนตักเตือนตัก
always reminding oneself to cut through the cutting itself.
เพราะนี่แหละเดี๋ยวก็เริ่ม
That's it.
นอกเหนือความจำเจ
It will enable to beyond all the repeatedness.
มันจะนอกเหนือไปเองลูกโอเคไปเอง
It will be beyond automatically.